The first time an alien child asked why humans fought so hard, Zakarian Kells had just gotten his shoulders stitched back together in the infirmary of a joint Terran Dravani outpost orbiting the gas giant Erdemy. Blood still soaked part of his uniform, and his left arm was strapped against his side with a pressure sling. The medic, a pale-skinned Glavari nurse named Yil, hovered nearby, watching him like he might spontaneously explode. He wouldn't he'd already done that on the battlefield. The child, a tiny green-skinned Lorady named Palex, stood on its three-toed feet in front of him, staring up with wide, unblinking eyes. It held a scribble pad in its small claws, the kind used in their learning pods. "Why do you fight so hard?" Pelex asked. "Your body is soft. You were slow, yet you did not retreat." Zakarian blinked. He'd been expecting something like, "Are you edible?" which he'd actually been asked once by a curious Craventh. He shifted upright, teeth clenched at the pull in his side. "We protect those we love." Pelex tilted its head. "Love is a chemical condition. So is fear. You could avoid harm by not loving." "Yeah," Zakarian muttered. "But then we wouldn't be human. That exchange should have ended there." But it didn't. 2 days later, Zakarian was called to a diplomatic panel to explain that exact phrase to a group of alien delegates and their children. Apparently, Pelex had repeated it during a presentation, and it had sparked a wave of interest. Or confusion. Possibly both. The aliens hadn't decided. Zakarian stood in the center of the circular room, surrounded by rows of seats filled almost entirely with alien younglings, each flanked by an adult translator or guardian. The only other human present was Commander Ren Zayler, who leaned against the far wall with a bandage over one brow and an expression that said, "You're on your own, Kells." A tall, bird-like Urifi adolescent raised one wing. "Why do humans not retreat when overwhelmed?" Zakarian rubbed the back of his neck. "Because sometimes the people behind us can't run. So we stay." A low murmur buzzed through the room, dozens of alien voices whispering translations. A young Venery, its translucent skin shimmering under the lights, piped up. "But your bones break. Your organs rupture. You are not well armored. This is inefficient." Zakarian smiled faintly. "Yeah, but we've got something most armor doesn't." The child leaned forward. "What is that?" "Desperation." That earned a few confused chitterings, and one translator, a squat, moss-colored Falari, interjected, "Desperation is not a tactical asset." Zakarian shrugged. "You've clearly never seen a mother drag a broken leg through gunfire to get to her kid." The room went quiet. Dead quiet. Even Ren straightened a little. Then came the first real test. A distress call from the mining colony on the moon of Dren Hassa came through with garbled audio and a 3-second video burst of screaming civilians and collapsing structures. The Dravani called for an immediate response. Zakarian was volunteered. Ren insisted on coming. The two humans were joined by a squad of 7 alien peacekeepers from various species. The dropship shook as it broke through the moon's atmosphere, turbulence rattling their seats. Zakarian, strapped into his harness, checked his rifle, then glanced at Ren. "You good?" She nodded, chewing the inside of her cheek. "Feels like home." He grunted. "Yeah, disaster always does." The moment the hatch opened, heat and smoke slammed into them. Half the colony was burning, and the other half looked like it had been chewed by something too big to fit in the known ecosystem. The peacekeepers fanned out. Zakarian and Ren took the left side, moving through rubble and twisted piping. Screams echoed through the haze. A cluster of colonists, human, Venery, and 2 Glavari, were pinned beneath a collapsed structure. Zakarian dropped to his knees beside them, scanning the wreckage. "Ren, I need a support beam cut here. I think I can shift the rest without it caving." She fired up a plasma saw and got to work. The Glavari child sobbed, one leg pinned beneath a slab of metal. "I'm scared," the child whimpered. Zakarian pressed a hand to the kid's trembling arm. "I know. Hold on. We'll get you out." As Ren cut through the beam, the structure groaned. Zakarian shoved his shoulder under a mangled pipe, bracing it with everything he had. "Go," he shouted. Ren yanked the child free, dragging her back. The moment the weight eased, the structure collapsed further, and Zakarian was thrown sideways, his leg catching under a support girder. Pain exploded through his thigh. He didn't scream, but his vision went white at the edges. Ren was there in a heartbeat. "Your leg's stuck." "Noticed." She tried to lift the beam. It didn't budge. The Glavari child limped over, tears streaking her pale face. "Why did you not leave me?" Zakarian forced a shaky breath. "Because you're someone's kid." The girl blinked. "But you are not my parent." Doesn't matter. It took 15 minutes for the rest of the team to reach them. By then, Zakarian was pale and sweating. They cut the beam and hauled him out. His leg was swelling under the pressure of his pants, and he couldn't put weight on it. Back on the ship, the medical team ran scans. Compound fracture, mid-femur. They set the bone and immobilized the leg in a brace. He'd be off it for at least 10 weeks, longer if complications set in. The next day, a visiting group of alien children returned to the outpost. Among them was Pelex. Zakarian sat in a wheelchair, leg elevated, arms still strapped from the previous injury. Pelex approached him slowly. "You nearly died for someone you did not know." Zakarian nodded once. "Yeah. Why?" He looked at the child. "Because someone out there would have missed her. And that was enough." Another child, this one a young Veskari with glittering eyes, stepped forward. "You cannot save everyone." "No," Zakarian agreed. "But if we don't try, then what's the point?" The children went quiet. Later, Rin wheeled him to the observation deck. The gas giant loomed outside the glass, its swirling clouds tinged with violet and gold. "You know," she said, "you're becoming a bit of a folk hero." Zakarian snorted. "Great. Maybe they'll tell tales of the limping idiot who couldn't duck fast enough. You stood your ground for a kid you never met." He looked out at the stars. "That's just what you do." Rin was quiet for a long minute. "You think they understand now?" "Maybe not," Zakarian said. "But I think they're starting to." A week later, still unable to walk unaided, Zakarian gave a talk to the younglings. Not about war, or tactics, or wounds. He told them about his sister, who once jumped onto a frozen lake to drag him out when he fell through. About his father, who ran into a burning barn to save a neighbor's dog. About people who didn't think twice, because the people they loved needed them. Sometimes, he told them, we do things not because they're smart, not because they're safe, but because someone we care about needs us to. Pelex raised a claw. "Then love is a weapon?" Zakarian smiled, wincing slightly as he shifted in his seat. "No, it's a shield. And some days, it's the only armor we've got." Pelex wrote that down. So did half the others. Later, as he was wheeled back to the infirmary for another round of physical therapy, Rin walked beside him. "You think they'll remember?" "If they do," he said, "maybe someday we won't have to fight so hard." But until that day, he'd keep doing it anyway. 41 hours after the Drenhasser rescue, Zakarian Kells was flat on his back in a hydrotherapy tank, trying not to scream as the automated jets pulsed against the bruised muscle around his healing femur. The water was warm, the lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the quiet humming of the machinery and the occasional beep from the console monitoring his vitals. "Stop tensing," said Dr. Nil, a red-throated Drolly with 3 arms and a bedside manner best described as reluctantly tolerant. She stood behind a transparent barrier, tapping her lower fingers against a screen. "Your heart rate spikes every time the jets cycle. You're fighting the machine. Don't." Zakarian exhaled slowly, trying to unclench his jaw. "It's not the jets. It's the memory of trying to crawl out from under a girder the size of a public shuttle." "You didn't," Nil said flatly. "You were extracted. There's a difference." "Thanks for the reminder." She didn't respond. She rarely did unless it was absolutely necessary. Zakarian had learned to appreciate the silence. Half an hour later, he was wheeled into the main rehab ward, where his leg was strapped into a motorized brace to begin assisted motion exercises. He gripped the armrest tightly as the brace extended his leg 2 degrees beyond what it wanted. A young Kavari technician, all angles and translucent antennae, adjusted the settings. "You have impressive pain tolerance for a species with no regenerative tissue." "Thanks," Zakarian muttered through gritted teeth. "We practice a lot." The technician clicked her mandibles, a sound that meant either respect or concern. He wasn't sure which. By the time he was back in his room, it was past the 4th rotation bell. He just managed to transfer from the chair to the bed when the door opened and Pelex stepped in, followed by 2 other Lorady children and an adolescent Terrylux whose bioluminescence flickered in a cautious pattern. No adults accompanied them. Zakarian raised an eyebrow. "You guys sneak out of a lesson?" Pelex pointed a claw at the chair beside the bed. "May we ask more things?" He gestured at the chair. "As long as I don't have to stand up." They settled in. The Terrylux child sat on the floor, light pulsing gently. Pelex leaned forward. "Yesterday we studied species extinction. Some species went extinct because of competition. Others due to environment. But humans, your history has included self-inflicted extinction attempts." "Why?" Zakarian blinked. "That's a hell of a topic for 4th rotation." We do not understand why a species would threaten itself. The other Lorady nodded. You create tools that poison your own air. You fight over resources you could share. It does not follow logical survival patterns. He rubbed his temples. You ever seen kids fight over the last square of dessert even though there's another tray of it in the kitchen? They stared at him. It's not about need. It's about wanting to win. Pelex tapped his pad. So you fight because of pride? Sometimes. Sometimes because we're scared. Or angry. Or someone tells us the other side is a threat, even when they aren't. The Terrylux child's glow dimmed. Then how do you survive yourselves? Zakarian looked at them, as tired but sharp. Because every time we get too close to wrecking it all, someone, some group, some person pushes back. Pulls others out of the fire. Reminds us why we're still worth saving. Pelex hesitated. Are you one of those? He chuckled. I'm just a guy with a limp and a bad habit of being in the wrong place at the worst time. The door slid open again. This time it was Commander Ren Zayler, cradling a data tablet under one arm and looking mildly surprised to see the small gathering. Didn't realize visiting hours applied to educational interrogations now. Pelex stood. We will return later. No rush, Ren said, stepping aside so they could shuffle out. Just don't dismantle any life support systems next time. Once the door closed, she dropped into the chair they'd vacated. You know the Vascari delegation filed a motion to give you a cultural ambassadorial title? Zakarian groaned. Please tell me it doesn't come with a sash. No sash, she said. But there's a ceremony. With speeches. And dancing. I will fake my own death. I already told them you had a chronic allergy to formal footwear. Bought you time. He reached for the water bottle on his nightstand, wincing as his shoulder reminded him it still existed. You ever think we're not meant for diplomacy? That we're just the punchline in a galaxy full of straight men? Ren tilted her head. You mean like a human and 3 aliens walk into an ethics conference? Exactly. She grinned. You might be right. 2 days later, a new group of students arrived. This time, they came with an assignment to observe human behavior in a non-combat setting. The outpost staff, desperate for something resembling structure, set up a rotation. Zakarian drew the short straw and was assigned an observation pairing with a Darskian youth named Vel. The Darskians were aquatic, with thin, glistening skin constantly misted by a personal hydration field. Vel had large, unblinking eyes and a habit of writing notes mid-conversation without ever breaking eye contact. You eat 3 times per solar cycle, Vel said, watching Zakarian struggle with a protein bar in physical therapy. But the nutritional value of these bars is minimal. They're not for nutrition, he replied. They're for regret. Vel blinked once. Why do you persist with inefficient sustenance? He took another bite. Because it's easy to carry. And beats trying to cook in a med bay. Vel wrote that down, pausing only to ask, why do you continue with rehabilitation even though it causes pain and delays your other tasks? Zakarian adjusted the brace on his leg. Because not healing isn't an option. There are other humans. Could they not perform your duties? They can, but they're not me. Vel considered that. So your identity is tied to your function? He laughed. No, my identity is tied to what I'm willing to do even when I'd rather not. That's the trick to being human. It's not about what we want. It's about what we refuse to give up on. That seemed to stump Vel. He stopped writing, just staring at Zakarian like he'd said something that didn't compute. Later that week, an unexpected event disrupted the entire outpost. A solar flare from the gas giant disrupted the orbital stabilizers. One of the research pylons broke loose from its tether and began drifting toward the gravity well. Inside that pylon were 3 technicians, including a human engineer named Deva Lin, who had gone out to recalibrate the solar sensors and hadn't returned before the tether snapped. Emergency tethers couldn't reach the module in time. Zakarian was in the control center when the alert went out. Ren was already moving. Let me go, he said, half out of his chair before his knee buckled. You're not cleared for EVA, she snapped. I'm cleared for desperation. That count. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the nearest technician. Give me a tether drone and a mag clamp suit. Someone get Deva on comms. Within minutes, she was being fitted into a suit. Zakarian watched from the window as she launched, tethered to a drone that accelerated just fast enough to catch up with the pylon. Vel stood beside him, watching the feed. You are not the only one who acts without guarantee of success. Zakarian nodded. Nope. I'm just the one who made it trendy. They watched in silence as Ren reached the drifting module, anchored herself and pried open the emergency hatch. Deva, alive but unconscious, was pulled out and secured. The drone reeled them both back in. Hours later, when Ren was back and Deva stabilized, Vel returned with a new notepad. "I understand now," he said. "It is not that you are illogical. It is that your logic includes possibilities others do not calculate." Zakarian leaned back in his chair, exhausted. "We call that hope." Vel wrote a single word. Then he left, and Zakarian closed his eyes, leg throbbing, shoulder aching, and strangely, for the first time in days, smiling. The artificial dawn cycle had barely started when Zakarian Kells was woken by an insistent tapping at his door. Not the sharp, protocol-trained knock of a superior officer, but a rhythm too erratic to be adult and far too persistent to be accidental. He blinked against the dimmed lights, rolled his aching leg over the side of the bed, and called out with the hoarse resignation of a man who knew he was about to regret answering. "Yeah, come in." The door hissed open. Pelex entered, followed by a pair of tall, thin-limbed Valari twins whose skin gave off a soft yellow glow under stress. One of them was carrying a flat, black box nearly half their size. The other wore a bandolier of styluses clipped across their chest like ammunition. Zakarian blinked. "It's earlier than even you usually show up." Pelex stepped forward. "We require your participation in a demonstration." "Is this about the speech thing again? Because I already told Vel I'm not climbing on any stages, even if someone threatens to set me on fire." "No," Pelex said. "This is about pressure thresholds." Zakarian rubbed his temple. "What?" The Valari twins set the box down and opened it together, revealing layers of clear tubing, small fluid reservoirs, and a circular band that looked suspiciously like a modified blood pressure cuff. One of them unrolled a diagram on the floor, and it took Zakarian a moment to realize it was a schematic of a human circulatory system his own, judging by the annotation in the upper corner. "Subject Kells, post-trauma, limb 2. You've been reverse engineering my leg?" One twin nodded. The other pointed to the cuff and said, "This will simulate gravitational stress. We wish to see the limits of your pain tolerance as it relates to vascular resilience." Zakarian stared at them, then turned to Pelex. "Did you just ask if you could torture me for science?" Pelex tilted his head. "It is not torture. It is educational discomfort. I'm not a crash dummy. Your medical records suggest otherwise." One of the Valari pressed a button, and the cuff inflated slightly with a hiss. Zakarian's knee flared with heat. "Nope," he said, reaching over and yanking the tube free. "We're done here." The twins looked mildly offended. Pelex looked intrigued. "What is the threshold, then?" Pelex asked. "Threshold for what?" "For when you decide pain is no longer worth enduring." Zakarian exhaled through his nose. "When it stops being for something. If I'm hurting and someone gets to live because of it, I'll take more than you think. But if it's just for curiosity or data, then this," he gestured to the cuff, "is where I draw the line." The twins quietly repacked their device. Pelex did not move. "You confuse many of us," Pelex said. "You use logic in survival but not in suffering, because we believe some things are worth suffering for." Pelex tapped his pad again. "So pain is not the enemy?" Zakarian leaned back against the wall, rubbing his thigh. "Pain's just a warning. Tells you something's wrong. Ignoring it can kill you. Listening to it can save someone else." The twins paused in their packing. One looked at him. "We do not have that distinction in our culture. You will now." By midday, word had already spread. One of the Glavari instructors requested Zakarian to speak to her class not about tactics or survival, but about the psychology of endurance. He declined politely, citing ongoing physical betrayal from his own leg. Instead, he was wheeled to the observation deck again, where several of the children had gathered, pretending to study a holographic chart of planetary tectonics but clearly more interested in watching the humans interact. A Eurethi child approached him hesitantly, blinking its secondary eyelids in a slow rhythm. "May I ask a question?" "You already did," Zakarian said. "But go ahead. You do not regenerate. You do not heal quickly. And yet you keep placing yourselves in harm. How do you know when to recover versus when to act?" Zakarian considered that. "You don't always. Sometimes you act when you should rest and rest when you should act. You do your best and hope you guessed right." The child looked puzzled. "Guess?" "Yeah. Educated guess. Best estimate. We don't always know what's going to happen. We just try." A pause. "That is terrifying." Zakarian grinned. "Yeah. Welcome to humanity." Later that afternoon, during a standard systems check near the outer hull, a pressure leak triggered an automated lockdown. 3 service tunnels sealed simultaneously, trapping a maintenance crew in a low-oxygen chamber behind a misaligned access hatch. The emergency override synced incorrectly, and communications dropped. Zakarian was in the med-bay, undergoing a muscle stimulation cycle for his thigh when the alert came through. He sat up too fast, nearly pulled the electrode leads from his leg, and cursed under his breath. "I'm going. Dr." Nil stepped in front of him, arms crossed. "You will not make it 10 meters without assistance." "I don't need to make it 10. I just need to talk." 10 minutes later, patched into the emergency relay, Zakarian sat at a console, headset pressed against his ear as he spoke to the trapped crew. The engineer on the other end, a young Dravani named Jelt, was panicking. "We're losing coherence. Air pressure dropped below safe levels. We need a bypass on the secondary intake." "You're going to be fine," Zakarian said, keeping his voice steady. "You've got backup systems. You just need to stay calm and reroute the intake through the maintenance manifold. That'll flood the chamber with coolant vapor. Better than suffocating. You've got 5 minutes of breathable air. Can you hold your breath for 10 seconds? Silence. Yes. Then do it now. I'll talk you through the rest." Behind him, Ren paced, arms crossed, eyes locked on the pressure chart as it fluctuated. "Now cut the blue wire under the primary seal. Not the green one. That's your failsafe. You cut that, the whole chamber depressurizes." More silence. A faint hiss came through the calm. Then, bypass engaged. "Pressure is rising." Ren exhaled sharply. Zakarian leaned back, headset slipping from his ear. "Told you. Just needed a little encouragement." 3 hours later, he was back in his room, leg elevated, and trying to stretch without tearing anything. The door opened again. This time it was Vel. "You spoke to the trapped ones," Vel said, not asking. "I did. You did not go to the chamber." "What?" "I couldn't walk that far. And if I went, I'd just be another problem to fix." Vel sat on the floor. "So you helped in the only way you could. That's all anyone can do." Vel was silent for a while, then asked, "Is that how humans endure? By finding the smallest way to help, even when broken?" Zakarian looked at the ceiling. "Sometimes that's the only way." Vel stood, light dimming slightly with thought. "Then your strength is not your body. It is your refusal to stop." He smiled, tired. "Yeah. That's about right." By evening, a new notice was posted in the central corridor, a revised curriculum for interspecies education, with an added module titled Adaptive Response Philosophies, Human Endurance Models. Zakarian didn't attend the opening lecture. He was asleep, for once, dreamless and quiet. No alarms. No questions. No pain he couldn't handle. Just the soft hum of systems working in tandem, human and alien, flawed and learning, and a single line scribbled on the edge of Vel's notepad. They survived not because they are the strongest, but because they refuse not to.